All right, thanks for those of you who are joining us. I see a number of people joining in. We'll give them about a minute more. I see we have some people from Philly, New York, Alabama, Tennessee, Illinois. Oh, this is great. See some familiar names and unfortunately not faces because there are too many for us to see. When we kick off in a second, there's a chat function that'll be there for everybody who's participating. If you have questions throughout, certainly we will be monitoring the chat and respond to those as we go through. Michelle, anything else, any logistics that you want to consider before we get going here?
No, I think that covers it. We really encourage the chat function. We will be monitoring it. We want to make sure we answer your questions, allow you to kind of engage. We'll ask some questions of you as well. So we want to really be able to gain that perspective from everyone and be able to support and help as we can.
All right. Well, let's get started. It is good to be with all of you today. My name is David Hartman. I work for Schoolworks. My focus of work is very specifically working with authorizers and accountability systems, either with larger organizations or specifically with authorizers in a number of different ways. And I am joined with by my colleague, Michelle Doan. Michelle, you can introduce.
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Doan. I am a consultant and project manager with Schoolworks based in Nashville, Tennessee. I do a lot of work around accountability and authorizer quality and evaluations, but I also do work around school quality and charter school development.
All right, so Schoolworks, who are we? I see a number of familiar names on the list, so some of you know who we are, but those of you who don't, Schoolworks is an education consulting organization specializing in evidence-based program evaluation, planning, intervention, support, and monitoring. And we've supported authorizers for over 20 years, and we help them to ensure the quality of the schools in their portfolios. We've partnered with organizations to help them effectively and consistently fulfill their roles with transparency and fidelity. Bottom line, we engage with our clients to help them where they are, whether they are a large authorizing office or a newer one that's just starting up, to help them figure out their systems and be the highest quality authorizer. Schoolworks in general does work across all of public education, outside of just authorizing new school reviews, leadership supports, instructional supports, and some work with school developers. But anyway, that is who Schoolworks is, and that is who we are. All right, so why are we here today? We know that working with special education and monitoring and conducting oversight of special education is a responsibility that charter school authorizers have, and it is often a very big challenge and fulfilled in many different ways with varying levels of quality. We're not here to cast any judgment on how anybody fulfills it, because we appreciate the challenge and that there are unique contexts. So our aim here is to help authorizers think about these things. So we know that many authorizers provide technical support to the portfolio of schools when it comes to special education. Some, on the other hand, set compliance expectations and collect evidence. So they don't do the support, but they do collect the information. And then the third is that they respond to issues as they emerge. Depending on who you are, what your context is, you may do one of those three things, or you may be a combination of any of those three things. What we believe is that defining appropriate systems to guide the regular oversight and intervention that you need will help you to fulfill your role. And so what we want to do today is talk through some of that to help folks proactively plan so that they know exactly what they're doing and learn from each other about what are the best ways in which to satisfy the responsibility for special education oversight. So we have 3 objectives today, and we'll kind of walk through in this order. So we hope that all of you are able to identify why you consider the quality of special education programming. Plain and simple that. Michelle, do you have 2 and 3 here?
Yep. And so the next objective we really have is to walk through kind of identifying the evidence that is needed to collect via this oversight of special education programming. And then lastly, we want to kind of talk through what kind of systems are most efficient and effective in order for you as authorizers to fulfill the task. So we realize that authorizers are doing different things and may have different systems. And so it's not about necessarily promoting one over another, but it's really just talking through some options of what is out there as you think through what would be best for your own office.
All right.
So we want to just start off really quickly and give you a moment to think about this initial question is, why as authorizers are you considering the quality of special education programming? So take a minute to think about that, enter answers in the chat. There are no right answers. We just want to know as authorizers yourselves, why is special education programming important to your office and why are you considering the quality of it in your oversight?
All right. Thanks. Let's give it another minute. All right. Hit submit if any of you have additional there.
Yep. So these are really great answers. Just reading off the chat, a lot. I mean, we're hearing a lot of there are students, they matter. We have to ensure that everyone's getting those quality services. But then there also are the legal and equity and the compliance obligations as well. And that's really what we want to emphasize too is, yes, there's a lot of compliance related requirements around special education and it can seem unwieldy, but at the end of the day, all of these laws and these legal compliance requirements are there for a reason. And it's to ensure quality special education programming and to ensure that all students, including students with disabilities, have that access to a high quality public education, making sure they have the supports and services in place. That's why all these laws were originally created, that the compliance requirements are based off of. And so that's something, though, to keep in mind as you're thinking about special education programming. At the end of the day, it's really about high quality education and supporting all students.
All right, thanks. And Michelle, Jen reminded me that participants can't see our answers. So next question, we'll read those off. My bad. However, just in summary, everybody, what you're seeing is very similar to what Michelle just shared. A lot of answers about all students, ensuring the quality of everybody, and considering compliance as a means and performance as a means. So thanks all of you who responded in the chat, and we'll call those out as we see them the next time we open. So a couple things to consider as you either think about your system or if you're thinking about setting up new systems in order to fulfill your responsibility for special education oversight. First off is you just need to know your law. So every state has a different charter law. Generally, everybody is expected, every charter school is expected to provide special education to the students who satisfy. However, you need to know who is the responsible party. In some states, and this is general, you'll need to think about your own state, but think about the context in everything that we're hearing and sharing today is that it's a little bit different from next to next. So are your charter schools LEAs? So in some states, the local education agency is the charter school itself, whereas in other states, the charter schools are part of another LEA, and that LEA may be the district, and that's often the case. And so sometimes the authorizer is actually the LEA who ultimately has the legal obligation to make sure that special education is fulfilled. In the case of states in which charter schools are the LEAs specifically, then the charter school is solely responsible to provide comprehensively all of the responsibilities specific to special education. In addition to that, when thinking about authorizing, there are kind of two things to consider. Is when you're thinking about your oversight, there is regular oversight. These are the planned reports, evidence collection, reviews. Many people do them in different ways, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, but those are the things that you know that you're going to do. You communicate out to your schools on a regular basis. This is information that we're going to collect. It's ideally set into your contract with those outcomes identified in your performance framework. We'll talk about this with OEI, and we'll explain that acronym to those of you who are not familiar. But that's regular oversight, and then there's intervention. So procedures to be used when issues present themselves. So when there is an issue or report, a complaint that comes in either to you or to another organization that is filtered to you, that you are obligated to follow through on. So what is your regular oversight, and then how do you respond to issues that come in front of you? So think about those things. Additionally, we at SchoolWorks talk about knowing your philosophy. So how do you approach just your authorizing work in general? So some authorizers talk about outcomes only. So they're just looking for evidence, and they're just looking at those outcomes. Both of these approaches and everything in between is fine. It's based on how you approach authorizing, but you need to know when thinking about your oversight systems what your philosophy is. So are you focused only on outcomes and the evidence that's generated, or are you looking at outcomes plus the quality of the programming that the school is engaged in? So a difference between these two philosophies is somebody who looks at reports or reads through files to look for compliance and academic outcomes, which are just outcomes only. And another authorizer may do all of that and do a school review or a special education review in which they're looking at going into classrooms, interviewing the teachers and the administration to figure out what is the program, how do they support each other, and how are they fulfilling those responsibilities. Different authorizers approach these things different ways. Again, it's just a matter of knowing what is your philosophy, and your oversight and expectations should align or be constructed relative to your philosophy. Anything to add on that, Michelle?
No, but just a reminder that if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll make sure that we address them.
All right. So going back to that common characteristic between the two sets of philosophies that we just talked about, you do need to collect evidence in order to support your oversight of the contract, and specifically special education programming. So we say that it's a logical sequence, and you need to be able to kind of walk it back. So you start with your contract. What are the legal obligations? What are the performance expectations that you've identified within the contract? Most contracts have what's called a performance framework. It comes in many different names. Most are named performance frameworks, but what are these specific expectations that are identified in the performance framework? Very specifically, well, kind of in between those two, disaggregated result for special education students are often part of the academic characteristics of the performance framework. So many authorizers look at the academic outcomes. But when you get into operational performance, there are often compliance-related expectations that are in performance frameworks. And then as you get very precisely, special education performance, academic outcomes, special education program compliance are some of the things that many authorizers kind of hang their hats on when they're talking about what is the evidence that we're collecting in order to determine whether or not the charter school is sufficiently and even high quality fulfilling their responsibility to provide special education programming. So it's really important to think about what you're responsible to collect and oversee, and we'll talk about some examples here. One thing before, Michelle, you start here to look and talk about a specific example. Jen said that the chat is enabled so everybody can see it. So if there's a question that you want to raise for everybody, we all will see that and be able to fulfill it. Michelle?
So now let's just talk about a few examples. This is not an either or. We just wanted to present some examples of how authorizers are overseeing both compliance and then also starting to consider the quality piece in their programming. Ideally, obviously, you want to try to gain both of them, but we know that obviously the compliance piece is also really important and has those legal ramifications. But what we want to propose is that having these processes and systems in place will really help support both your office as well as the students at those schools, and hopefully kind of lessen that administrative burden as you create those processes and those routines that everyone will kind of be able to get used to. So the first example we want to present is the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission and how they have a very specific process in assessing their compliance for special education. So the commission annually monitors its schools for compliance with ESSA and also IDEA and with the corresponding federal and state regulations. And they've developed a pretty comprehensive process and plan for how they do this, how the data is collected. They do things such as the monthly reporting calendar. They have regular check-ins. They have that annual monitoring process with a full checklist. And so this here, and then in the slide that's next that you'll see here is the compliance pieces that are specific to special education that they monitor throughout the year and then also at the end of the year in order to inform their monitoring report. And so what the commission does with all of this information is that they really implement kind of a continuous improvement model that helps their schools meet those compliance requirements. So they have created this process and this checklist to really support the schools in understanding what the requirements are, what is really needed, and in order to help schools understand what's required of them, and so that it's not kind of a scramble to get the information, or so there's not confusion around all of that. They kind of do this and implement this by having those regular communications to their schools. They provide that monthly reporting calendar that I had mentioned. They have that annual monitoring process. They have these conversations with the schools so that both the commission and the school kind of throughout that year always have a really clear understanding of where they are meeting compliance, where they may not be in compliance, and if they're not in compliance, kind of what is needed in order to satisfy those requirements. So this is just one example of how an authorizer has really kind of thought through all of the compliance requirements and then built out a process that specifically addresses those pieces. But this is also then taken in addition to their overall performance framework as well. So then in their performance framework then really gets to the quality, and then they have this separate kind of compliance piece where they're able to monitor that piece.
And one thing to add here is that as you look at all of these acronyms and these very specific characteristics, one, some of the terminology like measurable annual goals, MEGs, is probably something that aligns with their performance framework, and it's very specific, and it may, as much of this, directly align with the charter school law in Tennessee, right? So one of the things is this is a great resource. Brenda from Trine asked if that you all will be able to see this PowerPoint afterward. Yes, for sure. Just don't take it wholesale and implement it as is. You need to be able to customize, make sure that it aligns with your charter law if you were to look at this as an example. But certainly it just shows the deliberate work that they do at the commission or have planned to do at the commission in order to look at charter school special education compliance.
All right, and then the next example we wanted to present was around how an authorizer has specifically integrated special education within their performance framework. So this is from the Indianapolis Mayor's Office of Education Innovation, and so that is OEI that Dave referred to earlier in the presentation. So in their performance framework, they have a specific question, a key question: do the school special education files demonstrate that it is in legal compliance and is moving towards best practice? So as you can see there, they are kind of combining or starting to combine both that compliance piece as well as the quality. So their criteria around kind of their IEPs being appropriate and including the goals, that they're rigorous, but then they also talk about the curriculum and the instruction aligning with student needs. And so in that respect, they're starting to think about, yes, we want to meet all of these compliance requirements, but then kind of taking that step further in how can we then kind of also be evaluating the quality of the special education programming that is then in alignment, and they can kind of see it in terms of the academic outcomes that the school is achieving. You know, one thing to note here though is as you're thinking about the quality of special education programming, you always want to keep in mind autonomy. So while it is important, you want to make sure that your schools are providing that high quality education to all students. You also kind of have to take a step back and make sure that you are also ensuring that you're maintaining and preserving that autonomy with schools as you're kind of assessing the quality, that you're not kind of stepping forward and trying to make too many recommendations or suggestions and those pieces. But this way, this gives you just a little bit of a broader look, so both quantitative and qualitative of the special education programming. Dave, anything to add?
Yeah, the other thing that I want to just pull out as well is there are expectations like that are identified A through E here. And those are great. One of the things that I like about in the blue text or the white text in the blue box there is really thinking about a diversity of sources in which you're thinking about those things, and not to simply just isolate as one source for each one of the expectations, but that you're looking at an array of evidence in order to come to your determinations of compliance and or quality. Compliance sometimes will be one for one, right? Are they doing this effectively? And there's a specific report that gets to it. But when looking at quality, the evidence base ideally is more broad so that you can talk about those things more comprehensively. All right, so let's take a step back. We've kind of thrown a lot of information your way, and appreciate that people have engaged in the chat so far. And so if you could just take a minute or two, we'll let you kind of chew on this question and then kind of give back some of your thoughts. When you approach special education oversight of the schools that are in your portfolio, which systems are most efficient and effective for you? Some of this might be thinking aloud about some of the things that you've shared already, but feel free to drop some of those answers into the chat. You'll all be able to see them, and then we'll go on from there. Okay, those of you, whoop, take another 30 seconds or more. Please just drop some ideas in there. This is great to get different perspectives. Okay, so we see ones that teach personnel how to think and do differently rather than tell them what they are doing right or wrong. So more quality rather than compliance-based system, one person says. Another says collaboration with special education directors and conducting site visits. So that is sounds more like looking at quality in addition to compliance or outcomes. We hear from Cindy in Michigan. I think everybody can read this one. Special education compliance is the responsibility of the ISD, and they are recipient of IDEA funds, IDEA. Trine says that they've created their own Google Sheets for compliance, and they get access to each school's state documentation as well. So talking about evidence, Andrew, I think Andrew's from New York. We have a lot of forms that cover many qualitative aspects of the program, and think of that ahead of renewal and evaluation minutes. Norming is at the very end there. Interesting, we haven't talked about that yet, but certainly knowing that there's some reliability or fidelity of implementation across people. Anna Turner says layered systems of compliance and quality by doing audits plus classroom observations. That's getting into quality again rather than just outcomes. Andrew adds that New York City Department of Ed conducts some compliance checks through schools, so that there is additional documentation. Kelly in Tennessee says annual monitoring self-assessment is efficient and it's not the most effective because it only allows for a binary yes or no. They rely on supplemental monitoring to get deeper dives into compliance and outcomes. All right, so again, that's getting to differentiation of evidence. Keep putting that information in there. That's really good and interesting to hear that.
So Dave, one quick thing before we move on. Cindy had also asked about thoughts about partnering, since in Michigan, special education compliance is the responsibility of the ISD. So the idea of partnering with the ISD to obtain their feedback on compliance indicators so as not to minimize duplication of effort. That's a really great question. That's something that we have actually experienced a lot in our work with authorizers, and a good reminder for us to point that out, which is knowing where information is coming from. To your point, Cindy, yes, you want to try to minimize duplication efforts. So if you know if some of these pieces are kind of coming from different places, possibly partnering with them or developing that relationship with them so that you are not both doing the same work. It kind of lessens the burden then, and you're not getting the same information and kind of spinning your wheels on doing that as well. We've seen that just with other places, just knowing where you're getting information, whether it's from the state, whether it's from a different organization, or it's from the school or things like that. It's kind of mapping out maybe perhaps what the information is that you need, and then trying to figure out, is that data already available from a different source? And if so, can you access it rather than duplicating that effort? So that's a really great question. Dave, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just to that point, Michelle, it's always this challenge, right? Michelle and I were talking to a colleague the other day about some of this, and this idea of talking about efficiencies. All authorizers have limited resources, time, and ability to kind of conduct this oversight. Most, and I hope, and it kind of sounds like from some of the chat responses, all people here are really thinking about, this is about ensuring access to all students and making sure that the charter schools have the highest quality academic programming and programming for all students, right? That is a principle that's there. However, there are priorities of academic outcomes for all, and how you have your limited time and how you spend it, right, to get efficient. So there's this challenge that you all face in terms of going deep in this when you know that it's so very important, and also being able to prioritize those things. So really thinking about the not duplicating what somebody else does is very, very important. Those of you, there's a handful of people from Indiana who are on this call. We had a session, I don't know, a year ago or so, where Michelle and I were able to collaborate with the Indiana Department of Education, their special ed office, to kind of talk about who does what, right? Because it's very important that if people don't know what reports or what the state's oversight schedule is just simply for federal expectations, there might be reports that are already being generated by special education experts at the state that you can integrate into your system. But if you don't know where they are, who's doing it, or when those reports are generated, and which schools are going to be visited or evaluated on either a quarterly, annually, biannually basis, then you will probably feel like you have the responsibility to do it yourself. So really kind of deliberately going out to figure out what the information is, what's already out there. And so that goes to this slide, go to the source, right? Really think about the evidence. You don't have to generate or find or do all of the analysis. There's plenty of information that is out there that schools are reporting and that states are reporting. So try to figure out how and where the information is and whether it's accessible. Then figure out like what are the outcomes and does it fulfill your responsibilities comprehensively on a particular aspect of your performance framework, or is it a piece of information that you can use in order to answer that question, right? So is it a sole piece of evidence, or is it one piece of evidence that helps to get to a responsibility that you need to fulfill? And then what is the most efficient means to collect the evidence? Have you created a Google form in which the schools are submitting that information in a standardized fashion? Are you specifically getting information? Are you copied on the information from the state in which they're conducting annual, biannual, or complaint-based reports about the schools that are in your portfolio? Do you know who the people are at the state who are doing that? So really think about that information. As we've said multiple times, know when the evidence is available. So any regularly scheduled monitoring that a state does, or if you're in the case of a district having a responsibility, when they engage in any compliance or quality reviews regarding special education, just find that out, because it could be fulfilling some or all of a specific task or set of information that you need to know. Collaborate with those people so you understand why and how they're coming to their findings, right? Rather than just consuming good or bad, you need to know what the rubric is and what are the criteria. And then ultimately, once you've kind of figured out the array of evidence, when the schedule is create a schedule for yourself so that you know when information is coming in. Michelle, maybe you can share a little bit about what we have in the chat here.
Yep. So Cindy Shinsky says, so SVSU and CMU authorizers in Michigan. So I believe that's Saginaw Valley and Central Michigan University. So she's talking about they've partnered and are in the process of developing and implemented a guided review process. So that will be around kind of the compliance and performance issues in their schools. And that's another great point and another great resource is your fellow authorizers, especially if you're in states that have multiple authorizers, being able to kind of create those communities of practice and those relationships, since you'll have the similar, you'll both have the same kind of state laws, you'll have that similar understanding, and you'll be able to really work together. That's always good, using them either as a partner, using them as a thought partner through the process, even asking them for resources. Someone else may have a plan that you look at and really fits what you're looking for as well. So that's a great point, Cindy, just also relying on your fellow authorizers.
All right, so we've basically investigated like, what's your set of expectations? What's your philosophy? How are you gathering your information and thinking about the source itself? One of the things that Michelle and I and SchoolWorks in general think about is don't only just collect, but think about how you are reporting the information, right? And so you don't just collect information for you to consume, but you need to have a reason. So use your performance framework or rubric to determine the level of scrutiny needed, right? So determine if you're going to collect this information, it's not just that you have it and in that moment you determine whether the information is right or wrong. Actually do the pre-work to determine what are the outcomes of that report or this evidence that line up with your expectation, right? So don't be reactionary, but be planful in how you're going to consume that information and what that information means, right? What's good and what's bad. Determine who will review it, very important, right? Don't just let it fall in your lap or in your inbox and then not know who is your expert or if there are multiple perspectives that are being considered, right? So if you are lucky enough to have multiple perspectives in your office, like multiple people working in your office, it's good to rely on each other and make sure that each other are consuming the information in similar ways and have similar expectations when they analyze that information. Additionally, some offices have specialists rather than generalists. And so if you have somebody who has special education expertise in your office, then they may be the expert that you go to in order to determine, help to analyze the information. The point here is to really deliberately plan this information rather than just react to it when it falls in your lap or into your inbox. So how will the analysis and evaluation be communicated? Ultimately, all of this is public information. We owe it to the schools to make sure that they're understanding what's done with this information and what is the quality of it. So think about if it's an intervention, right? So if there's an issue that you're responding to, that you're following up in a timely based manner to say whether or not their response has fulfilled or the evidence that you've collected has kind of resolved the information or the issue that was there. Annual reports and renewal reports, we always advocate for authorizers to have annual reports that are aligned with performance expectations and renewal. So if there's special education compliance information, performance information that's collected on an annual basis, that the schools know how you're consuming it, and renewal should never be a surprise, right? So if you are communicating that information out publicly and directly to the schools on an annual basis, they know what their prospects for renewal are. And then ultimately, every authorizer needs to make high stakes decisions at the time of renewal. And so to communicate that out effectively, if you have a renewal report or what your public facing communication is, if you term it a report or not, but to make that public and make sure that it aligns with all of those expectations and it's clearly delineated in that report. Michelle, things to add about what people do with the evidence?
No, I think you covered it all. I think just to reemphasize that point that you made at the beginning, Dave, which is make sure that you know exactly what you're going to do with the evidence and that it is fulfilling a specific purpose, that you're not just collecting it because you think you should be collecting it. You're really using it to kind of inform these different data points around whether it's compliance, whether it's around quality, and that the schools are also aware and they can see how that evidence then is being used and that they kind of understand where the evidence is coming from, what the data points are, what that analysis is, and what led to that analysis.
Yeah. We are, let me look at the clock. So we're about 40 minutes in. We won't take necessarily the full hour unless people have a series of questions, but please we'll use the chat, reach out with specific questions if you have, and we'll take a couple of minutes to respond to some questions if people have some relative to the information that we've presented. And so as people are potentially generating questions, I just want to identify here at the bottom, you have our email addresses. You can talk with either Michelle or myself, or find some information about our work with different authorizers on our website. So Brenda at Shrine, we report out at our school board meetings quarterly regarding special education compliance. So just making it a deliberate component part of regular reporting, very good and transparent. Thanks, Brenda, for sharing that. Other examples or questions that people want to share? You all are doing this every day, and it's very important to kind of learn from each other and kind of hear what everybody's doing. Nope. All right. Just give another second here. Well, this is fantastic. Really appreciate hearing from all of you and the level of participation that we've had here. Just to kind of go back in summary to what we've heard, special education oversight is very, very difficult, okay? You have competing interests and you will have to determine what it is that you do and know why you do it. Oftentimes, charter school authorizing offices aren't able to do everything that they hope or want to do in terms of special education oversight. What we recommend is that you go through a deliberate process to determine exactly what is the information in your contract, what is the information in the charter law that is specific that you are responsible for in your oversight. If there's additional space that you have to expand to determine quality and give some formative feedback to your schools, that is often a positive thing that helps reinforce their appreciation of you rather than just being a bean counter, but somebody who gives them some success-oriented feedback or just feedback from your perspective. Michelle?
Yeah, so it looks like Kelly in Tennessee just shared some resources from the DC Public Charter School Board and the South Carolina Public Charter School District who have interesting tiered special education monitoring protocols. Included the link. Thank you so much for that, Kelly. And then Andrew talking about some unique practices of monitoring. SUNY may have done it in the past. The New York DOE still does this practice. Yes, and then the pandemic hit. So yes, that has definitely kind of changed how all of us have been operating and kind of had us pivot. So that is true. Thanks, Andrew, for that comment as well.
Just as an aside to the pandemic hitting very specifically, one of the things that we found in the last year and a half is that there is more that we can do remotely when it comes to quality, right? So the initial first blush that I thought was it's all about outcomes and you just monitoring the outcomes that are on the downstream end. We've engaged with many of our clients to do remote site or virtual site visits. And so adjusting protocols to really engage with people through Zoom or whatever to think about quality and learn about the quality of programming. While it's not exactly the same and you're not able to put fingers on files if you're looking to that level of compliance, but if you are trying to figure out how they're implementing their program, there is still a lot you can do in a remote sense, and it has kind of changed some of our thinking and perspective on what we can do sitting at our desks through a computer. So that challenge has kind of brought about some new thinking for us, and hopefully it's been doing some of the same for you. Michelle, why don't you kind of wrap things up once Jen, maybe you, Jen, if you could take a second and talk about what we will follow up with after this session.
Yes, actually, I'm glad you gave me that opportunity. We will have the recording of this session available. It will be posted on our website tomorrow. So if you want to refer any of your colleagues or friends, it will be accessible through schoolworks.org, and you just want to navigate to our events page and we'll have it posted there. We also typically follow up with all of our attendees and provide a link as well. So you should get it that way. But if you're looking for it, you can always navigate to our website and you can see some of the other sessions we have available as well.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Jen. There's great resources for any of you who have questions to follow up with us individually. Michelle, why don't you take us out?
All right. We really appreciate you taking the time today to kind of listen to us, engage with us, think through special education oversight as it relates to your authorizing office. We know there is not one solution, a one size fits all for this. It all really depends on kind of your philosophy, your context that you're working under, and a lot of different variables. But we hope that the session has been helpful in kind of getting you to think through your own processes, what else might be out there, and how you might kind of use what you've learned to inform your protocols and processes moving forward. And we hope to see you again in the future.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great day.